Hello, and thank you for choosing this clean historical Western romance by Emma Ashwood. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep sharing more wonderful stories for free. So grab a cozy spot, kick back, and let this story whisk you away to a different time and place. Enjoy. Copyright Emma Ashwood. The Mistletoe Miner by Emma Ashwood, Chapter 1. Cal Hardwick allowed himself to think about the upcoming festive season as he took the long walk back to his cabin in Nugget Falls after a day of mining. He glanced around at the snow-capped mountains and the sprawling pine forests before them, and it still took his breath away, even though he had lived there for all of his 25 years. He felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement as he thought about the annual holiday cheer, but also, hopefully, the imminent arrival of Rosie Tyler, to whom he had been writing after she wrote to him in reply to his advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. They had been writing for some time, and he had written to her a few weeks earlier to ask her to make the journey from New York City to marry him. He expected she would receive his letter any day now, and he was hopeful she would make the journey before Christmas. As he walked, he glanced around at the familiar and busy townsfolk preparing their homes and gardens for the upcoming festivities, excitement growing amongst them. This was a silent promise of respite from their mundane existence as miners who were prospectors, merchants, or dreamers. It was customary for everyone to do the jobs around their homes that they had been putting off or hadn't gotten around to, so that their homes looked nice for the season. The Colorado gold rush had brought about much hope of finally finding riches, but as of yet, none had been discovered in or around Nugget Falls, much to the disappointment daily of everyone in the small mining town. He wondered what it would be like to meet Rosie. He had never really been romantically involved with anyone before, always too busy working in the mines to bother about anything like that. He was much more accustomed to swinging a pickaxe than romancing a lady. One day, though, almost 12 months earlier, in the last festive season, he had decided that he needed to take a wife as he was not getting any younger. Since a few of his friends had successfully found wives through the publication, he had bravely placed his advertisement. A man of few words, he had not said much in his advertisement and had only received one response. He had nonetheless enjoyed their correspondence ever since, and the highlight of his month was receiving and reading the next letter from her. Rosie told him of her very different life in New York City, a life far removed from the dust and grime to which he was accustomed. Her life sounded much more civilized and well-lived, although she said she was eager to get away from it. He wondered if the change in lifestyle would suit Rosie and hoped she would be happy in a much more basic, simple life. He hoped she would be anyway. He hoped he would be enough for her and that he could offer her a life with which she could be happy. This was the only life Cal had ever known. His father had been a miner and had died only a few years earlier in a mining disaster that had shaken the whole town. His mother had died when he was a small child before they had the chance to have any other children, and so the passing of his father had left him with no family. He had taken over the cabin his father owned and lived a quiet life, which often left him feeling as though he was simply existing, mining taking most of his time in his dream to hit the big time. He wasn't greedy and had no desire to be rich, but he did hope to earn enough to be able to walk away from the mining work. It was dangerous, and what had happened to his father and many of the other men from the town, together with the stories they had heard from outside of the town, had shaken him and his confidence in the mines. The sooner he could stop this work, the better, but it was the only work available around his town, the only thing he knew he could do. It was therefore not yet an option to give it up to find other employment. In the 10 years he had been working in the mines, he had earned enough to get by, but had still not hit the big time. They had all heard of many mining towns, which had spurred them all on in their quest. They all knew that striking gold could be what was needed to change the lives of all the townsfolk, and this was enough to keep them all returning into the dark, claustrophobic mine day after day. He often thought about his mother. He wondered what she had been like, as he had very little recollection. His father had told him many stories about her and their short time together, and he knew she was loving and caring and a devoted wife and mother. He also knew she had fought cholera with everything she had, but had finally succumbed in his father's arms. His father had never gotten over her death. But over time, he had been able to talk about her with less pain in his eyes as he recounted many happy memories. Cal was thankful for that, as it had allowed him to feel as though he knew his mother in some way at least, having been too young to truly remember her. Because his mother had died so young, Cal had never really experienced a normal family. It had just been him and his father in the cabin for so long. He had friends who had both parents, of course, and he had looked on enviously whenever he had seen them together, but he had never really known a life with both parents. Cal knew in his heart that this is what had prevented him from ever letting a woman get too close to him. He had his mother so high up on a pedestal that no woman could ever meet his expectations. He would settle for no less than the love his parents had shared, and he had not known how or where to find that. He felt some optimism that this could be his chance, with Rosie. He knew some of the mail-order bride marriages had not gone to plan, but he felt as though he and Rosie had built up a good connection over the past 8 months. He trusted that she was a kind, gentle, and loving woman, as this is how she sounded in each of her letters. His father had been desperate for Cal to settle down with a wife and have his own family, and he wanted to make his father proud. Chapter 2. Rosie Tyler gently and silently opened the letter, which she knew to be from Cal Hardwick, the miner she had secretly been writing to. Her parents would not approve of her decision, so she had kept it from them, opening her letters in the privacy of her bedroom. Much of her decision to purchase the matrimonial times and consequently write to Cal was due to the manner in which her parents treated her. Both parents were controlling, demanding that she fall into her role in society as their daughter, when there was nothing she dreaded more. She had been born into the wealthy New York Tyler family, but still felt like an outsider with very little in common with her parents, and no interest in their strict societal expectations. Her parents had her life mapped out for her from the moment she had been born, and any time she had tried to deviate from that path, her domineering parents maneuvered her back onto their route. Her mother constantly reminded her that she should be grateful for the life in which they had raised her, and that not everyone was fortunate enough to have such opulence. But Rosie had little interest in their riches, and was not impressed by high society, unlike her parents. Rosie had lost count of the dinner parties she had attended, forced by her parents to act out a life she didn't feel was hers. She had been introduced to many eligible suitors, selected by her parents for marriage. She had resisted all as they were interested in only her dowry, and had no interest in getting to know her and her dreams and aspirations. She had felt like a trapped bird for so long as she could remember, and she dreamed of breaking free, flying the gilded cage and the life to which she simply didn't conform. And so it was that she had taken the bold move to buy the publication and go on to make the decision to write to Cal. As soon as she spotted the advertisement placed by the miner from a town called Nugget Falls, she had known she would write to him. She had waited for a few days before she plucked up the courage and put pen to paper, and another few days before she braved mailing it to him. It had been a long 4 weeks waiting for a reply. The fact that she was corresponding in secret meant that she had to fabricate reasons to go into town more often than usual to check for incoming mail. She had prayed every night that the clerk in the post office would not tell her parents if he saw them. She knew it was unlikely that he would run into her parents since they spent little time in town, having staff to do the shopping and chores for them. Rosie had spent hours upon hours reading tales of the Wild West, with descriptions of its boundless skies and rugged charm. She had been captivated and wondered if Nugget Falls would be just as magical. She had always been an avid reader, finding it a great way to escape from the reality of her life in a world in which she didn't belong. She found solace in the books she read, and as she aged, she was inspired by stories of love and thrilling adventure. It was in books that she had heard of the concept of mail-order brides. Later, she had heard about the matrimonial times from her mother, who was, of course, berating the very idea of people resorting to such measures. But Rosie saw it as her opportunity for liberation, and soon after purchased a copy. As controlling as her parents were, she was grateful they had always allowed her to read. She guessed it was a pleasant downtime for them when she would be less argumentative and more placid, giving them more time to focus on planning her future. She held her breath as she eased the paper open gently and held it in both her delicate hands. Rosie knew she had finally got the letter she had been hoping for. It was finally time, after 21 years of being in the Tyler family, for her to be free. Dearest Rosie, I do hope this letter finds you well. We have been writing to each other for quite some time now, and I enjoy our conversations. I believe we could be a suitable match and could make each other happy. I can't offer you the kind of life to which you are accustomed, but I can offer you everything I have and the hope for a family in the future. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, Rosie? If you agree, I would love for you to travel here as soon as possible so that we can be married and settled before Christmas. I hope to hear from you soon. Yours, Cal. Rosie. Couldn't wipe the smile from her face. This is what she had been waiting for, the new life she had been dreaming of for as long as she could remember. She heard a noise from beyond her bedroom door, quickly placed the paper under her mattress, and lay her head on her pillow, facing her bedroom door, with her legs curled up on top of the blanket. Her door slowly opened and she closed her eyes, hopeful the person would change their mind and leave. Rosie, her mother's voice said gently. Rosie? She opened her eyes and began to sit up, rubbing at her eyes as though she had just awoken. You are so tired these days. Come on, let's get ready for this evening, her mother said quietly as she took a seat next to Rosie on her bed. Rosie looked confused. Remember, we are going for dinner at the Netherdales this evening. Don't worry, there is no suitor waiting there for you. But you do need to show your face so people know you are still eligible. Oh, Mother, I completely forgot. Are you sure I need to attend? Rosie dared to ask, as her mother was in an unusually good mood. Well, I suppose if you are not feeling too well, your father and I can go alone and pass on your apologies. Is it lady problems, dear? Annabelle asked her daughter, who stared back at her wide-eyed, nodding that she was right. All right, I will let your father know you won't be joining us, but I will obviously spare him the details. You lie back down, and I will have Mrs. Brundell make you some soup for dinner, she said kindly before she stood and left. Rosie lay her head back on her pillow and remained motionless for a while, her thoughts flying through her mind. It was extremely rare for her mother to allow her to stay home, or even for her mother to be maternal towards her. She felt tears sting at her eyes as she wondered, not for the first time, what her life would have been like with a mother who was always caring and loving. Perhaps this was a new side to her mother that was going to be more prevalent now. Perhaps now wasn't the right time for her to leave, she pondered. She pulled the letter out from under the mattress and read his words again. A tear slipped down her pale cheek and into her long brown hair as she made the decision to decline Cal's offer of marriage. It wouldn't be fair to her parents. She knew they loved her, even if they found it hard to show sometimes. They were insistent that she should marry, but Rosie knew this was out of love for her and that they didn't want her to be lonely. She folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer next to her bed, tucking it into the back so it could not be seen when the drawer was opened. She would write to Cal the following day and let him know her decision. She knew this would mean the end of their budding relationship, but she also knew that leaving to marry Cal would bring about an end to her relationship with her parents. Chapter 3. Jolted awake by somebody roughly shaking her by the shoulders, Rosie sat up quickly and rubbed the sleep from her eyes. She waited a moment for her eyes to adjust to the dark room before she was able to see her mother standing over her, her face contorted with anger. "Mother, what time is it?" she asked slowly as she pulled her legs out from under her covers to stand up, feeling intimidated by her mother standing over her in such a way. It is 2:15 a.m., her mother shouted at her, in anger, spittle forming in the corners of her mouth. Rosie searched her brain to try to imagine what she could have done to make her mother so angry after she had been nice to her earlier. She glanced at the drawer in which she had concealed the letters from Cal, but it was still closed, so it couldn't be that. As she rose to her feet and reached for her nightgown, her mother opened the door wide, casting the light from the hall across her room, and indicated for her to go downstairs. Rosie shuddered, both at the thought of what she must have done wrong to upset her mother so, and at the cold night air on her bare feet. Angus, Rosie's father, stood in the kitchen with his hands on the enamel washing trough so that she could only see the back of his head. She could tell from his stance that he was angry too. But it was her mother who was to do the talking on his behalf, as usual. "You should have come tonight, Rosie," Annabel stated, her face so close to her daughter's that Rosie could smell the wine she had imbibed over dinner. "But you said it was all right," Rosie replied quietly, her eyes darting to the ground as her mother's bore into her. She felt her hands begin to shake. She had been confronted many times by her parents, but this felt worse for some reason. They seemed even angrier than she could ever remember them being. "Don't blame me for your tardiness," her mother exploded as she raised her hand and slapped Rosie's face. Rosie fell to the floor and put both hands on her cheek, shocked that her mother had laid hands on her. She held her breath. "There was an eligible man at the dinner. One you would have liked, at last. But you had to feign illness to stay home, didn't you?" "You stupid girl," her mother screeched. Rosie knew better than to argue when her mother was displaying such a temper. She managed to get back to her feet, her face smarting from the hard slap. She kept her blue eyes on the floor and waited for it all to end. She should have known it would be about a potential suitor whom she had missed out on. She wanted to protest that her mother had assured her that there would be no eligible men present that evening, but she knew better than to try to reason with them when they were in this mood. "You will attend every single event from now until after the Christmas season, and you will find a man who will put up with you. Do you understand me?" Annabel bellowed, her face contorted and reddened from her fury. "God only knows. We have tried for you." With that, her mother stomped across the room and through the doorway, slamming the door behind her, leaving her with her father, who still had his back to her and the whole situation. Her body quivered now from the cold seeping up through her feet and into her bones. Rosie stood rooted to the spot, too scared to move or even make a sound. It felt like an eternity before she finally heard her father move. She looked out of the corner of her eye to see that he had approached her and was standing to her right. "Do as your mother says. This is no longer optional, and we will no longer put up with your childish ways," he growled quietly, his voice sending chills through her body that competed with the cold. "Get to bed," he stated, and she scurried out of the kitchen before he had the chance to say anything more. She rushed up the stairs to her room and her bed and crawled in under the covers, still wearing her nightgown in a bid for warmth. She felt frustrated at her mother's complete change of heart in just a matter of hours, but not completely surprised. She should be used to it by now, and not get her hopes up. She was no more than a hindrance to her parents at this point. She silently opened her bedside cabinet drawer and retrieved the letter, which she opened and read again. Her parents were right. She should find herself a man. Little did they know that she already had, and now there was nothing standing in her way. She would leave the very next weekend, on the train that she knew would leave at midday on the Saturday. She was relieved not to already have written to tell Cal that she was not accepting his proposal. Chapter 4. It had been 6 days since she had made the decision to travel west to marry Cal. Her parents had behaved as though nothing had happened that night, and she had obediently gone along with them to every dinner party since, which seemed to her to be every evening. She talked to the eligible men in attendance, and she made all of the right noises to her parents so that they believed she was making an effort and was on the same wavelength as them. This only confirmed to her that all of the eligible men in the area were only interested in her dowry, as they showed no interest in her at all, unlike Cal through his letters. Her bag was packed with only essentials so that she would be able to manage it by herself. Because it was cold out, she was able to wear layers of clothing underneath her coat without drawing untoward attention to herself. Rosie had managed to secret some money from her father's office with ease, since he often left cash lying about, with no awareness of a definite amount. She had plenty of money to cover her ticket both ways if need be. She felt secure in the knowledge that she had a return ticket, having heard about unfortunate mail-order brides who had been tricked into traveling by fabrications and promises of a life that did not exist. She doubted her parents would welcome her back after she had left under such circumstances, but she also doubted that they would turn her away. Rosie placed the short letter in her bedside cabinet, knowing her mother would look for her in her bedroom when they returned from visiting their friends for the afternoon. She would no doubt want her ready for the next event that evening. Mother and Father, you said I should find myself a man with whom to settle down, and I am happy to tell you that I have, and that I am moving west to marry him. I have been corresponding with him for quite some time now, and one day I do hope you will make the effort to meet him. I will write to you once I am settled in my new home. Your daughter, Rosie. She had decided not to tell them too much at this time, as she knew they would be furious if they knew she was to marry a mere minor. She also knew for sure that they would be horrified if they knew that they had met through the matrimonial times. She would be true to her word and write to them when she arrived, in the hope that they would have calmed down enough by then to be able to listen to her and understand her wishes. She hoped they would eventually forgive her for leaving in this way, but she also felt as though they had given her very little choice in the end. With her bag in hand, she said a silent goodbye to her solace in this house, her bedroom. She swiftly maneuvered her way through the house and to the main door, which she quickly exited, closing it securely behind her. She placed her key under the doormat, knowing that they would look there when they discovered that she was gone. "Where are you off to with that big bag?" she heard someone ask from behind her as she straightened after hiding the key. She turned slowly, thinking what to say to her nosy neighbor who often seemed to appear at the wrong time. "Just into town to run some errands for Father," she replied quietly, a smile on her pretty face to ensure she was convincing. "Well, go careful. It is cold out. I almost caught my death," the neighbor proclaimed in her usual dramatic fashion. "Thank you, Mrs. Lawson. You should get yourself inside, shelter from the cold, and get yourself warm again. It was nice to see you," Rosie replied, to which the older lady nodded her head and approached her own door, whilst Rosie took the opportunity to scurry away. Once in town, Rosie took a moment to send Cal a telegram. It was more costly than sending a letter, but she knew a letter would not make it there before her, so a telegram was the only way to inform him of her imminent arrival. She hoped he would not mind her arriving earlier than he had probably thought she would. Her telegram was short and sweet. "Accepting your proposal. Depart Saturday, arrive Wednesday, noon. Meet me at station or later at hotel. Yours, Rosie." She was reluctant to leave any message in this town, sure that it would get back to her parents, but it was too late now for her to worry about that. They would soon know all about her new life. She felt a familiar knot of uncertainty and worry in her stomach, knowing how angry her parents were likely to be. Had she had siblings, her life with them might have been different. She had often thought, as the pressure they applied to her would have been shared amongst more than just the one child. But as an only child, she had borne the brunt of their demands. The train pulled onto the platform, and she showed her ticket and boarded, finding her carriage and taking the seat nearest to the window, placing her bag in the overhead storage area. She sat patiently, waiting for the train to disembark, eager to begin her journey before there was any chance of her being found out and stopped. Another passenger joined her in her carriage, and they smiled at each other in a friendly manner, knowing they were likely to be together for a lengthy journey. After what felt like an age, The train slowly moved away from the platform, and Rosie was able to relax in her seat as she watched the passing scenery beyond the speckled window. She had never been on a train before, as her parents thought it best to stay where they belonged, quite confused as to why they might want to meet other people beyond the borders of their town. Rosie had always wanted to travel further afield, wondering what she was missing in the big, wide world, and now she was able to drink it all in, her eyes jumping from one side to the other as she didn't want to miss a thing. "Your first time on a train, miss?" asked the older lady gently, a small smile on her aging face, which was undoubtedly beautiful in its day. Rosie nodded, her response to acknowledge the lady was right, and returned her gaze to the window, smiling in return. "My name is Isabel Cartwright. What is yours?" she asked a slightly frustrated Rosie, who just wanted to watch the world go by at this time. Rosie Tyler," she replied politely, and Isabel responded with a wide and most genuine smile, her kind green eyes twinkling. "It's nice to meet you," Rosie added honestly, suddenly realizing it could be nice to make her acquaintance, and it might pass the time more quickly. They chatted quite amicably for most of the afternoon, getting along famously. Rosie was grateful for the pleasant companionship. They sat together in the dining carriage during dinner, and then went their separate ways to their sleeping compartments. Rosie enjoyed the silence of the sleeping compartment, although she found it almost impossible to sleep with the movement of the train on the tracks, to which she was thoroughly unaccustomed. She was restless, without the option of looking at the passing view in the dark of the night out of the window. She allowed herself to think about her new life. She hoped Cal would be able to meet her when her train arrived on Wednesday, and she hoped and prayed that he would be everything he had promised. She didn't want the world. She had no interest in riches, but she did want an honest, kind, and reliable husband, which she was almost certain Cal was from his letters. Chapter 5. After a restless night, Rosie awoke, surprised to have eventually fallen asleep. She had given up on sleep in the early hours of the morning, but must have finally drifted off. She prepared herself and used the bathroom before returning to her carriage for the day, where Isabel was already sitting, looking just as elegant as she had the day before. They welcomed each other as Rosie took her seat by the window, grateful that the older lady had left it for her. They had a lovely day together, eating their meals together in the dining carriage and chatting about their lives and their dreams. Rosie found herself confiding in Isabel about the life to which she was traveling, wondering as she spoke if that was the right thing to do. "Go careful, my love. I have heard of a few ladies who have done the same, only to be tricked by devious men and end up trapped and very unhappy," Isabel said gently, a crease on her brows to show her worry for the younger lady. "Oh, dear," Rosie exclaimed, panic rising in her stomach and her heart fluttering. "I am hopeful I gave it enough time to get to know Cal and that there will be no surprises," she said, tears brimming her pretty eyes. "Well then, try not to worry, my dear. I didn't say it to worry you, just for you to be cautious," she replied gently and carefully. "I have brought enough money with me that I can return home should I need to, so at least I know I won't be stranded without options," Rosie explained, feeling as though she had made the right decision to take more money than she might need. "Oh, that is good," remarked her new friend. "Very sensible. Much more sensible than the ladies I speak of who got themselves in a bit of a pickle." She smiled again, relieved to have not worried Rosie too much. "Although I am not sure my mother and father will welcome me with open arms," she shared, immediately wishing she hadn't. "Why ever not?" asked Isabel, a perplexed look on her face. "Any parent should be proud to have you as a daughter." Rosie's eyes filled with tears again at the older lady's kind words. "I fear I do not meet up to their expectations. They believe I should have been married long ago and that I am stubborn." "Well, good for you," said Isabel, laughing. "You should be stubborn about who you marry. A lifetime is a long time to be with someone you aren't sure about," she added, a hint of sadness in her kind eyes. "Are you married?" Rosie asked gently. "I was, dear, to the most wonderful man. I was a very lucky lady, but he passed away a few years ago, and now I am finding it too hard to live alone, so I am headed to my daughter's house, where I am sure I will breathe my last." Isabel shared a small smile as she finished her sad sentence. "I'm sorry to hear about your husband," Rosie said earnestly, seeing the sadness in her new friend's eyes. "Don't be sorry, dear. He was the best thing to ever happen to me. When you find a kind and gentle man, there will be no regrets. You go and find your dream life, dear Rosie, with no regrets," she added. "Perhaps you will be one of the lucky ones, and your man has been open and honest with you from the start. I have a good feeling for you." "Thank you. I do too," she replied, and both ladies smiled at each other. Rosie couldn't help but smile at Isabel's kind and hopeful words, as her eyes diverted back to the passing countryside on the other side of the window. She had gotten used to the movement of the train now, and after an almost sleepless night, she felt her eyes closing as she welcomed sleep for a little while. Chapter 6. The train pulled to a stop at the platform in Colorado, and Rosie and her new friend made their way to the carriage door with their baggage in hand. They had spent a lovely time together, and both had said how grateful they were to have been in the same carriage, as it had really helped the time to pass by quicker than it would have. They had chatted, and Isabel had given Rosie the address of her daughter's house, so she could write to her and let her know how everything was going. Rosie couldn't help but marvel at this lovely lady who had been better than her own mother. She was full of affection and kindness. What a different life she would have had in her care. She had thought many times during their journey together. They had already said their goodbyes, but Rosie helped the older lady down from the train and onto the platform before her daughter excitedly whisked her away to their new life together. Rosie patted down her dress at the front, eager to look her best for Cal, but anxious that he might not have been able to get there so soon, leaving her no option than to find lodgings. With her bag by her feet only a few steps away from the train, she looked up and around the bustling platform. There were many people greeting others from the train, and she watched, smiling, as they embraced happily and then went about their day. The platform began to empty when she saw a man rushing towards her, a genuine smile on his very handsome face. She held her breath, hopeful that this was indeed Mr. Hardwick. His smile was infectious, and she couldn't help but smile in response as she watched him approach, certain now that he was looking at her. "Miss Tyler?" he asked, his voice deep and his accent thick. She nodded that she was, as she bent to pick up her bag, but Cal rushed up and picked it up for her. "Thank you," she spoke. "Mr. Hardwick, I presume?" she asked tentatively, noticing his hard-working hands on the strap of her luggage. "Please call me Cal. Mr. Hardwick was my father." He laughed as he held out an arm for her to link into so he could guide them off of the platform. She gratefully accepted, feeling happy as she suspected that she had found herself an honest man who had told her nothing but the truth. So far, at least. "Well then, you must call me Rosie," she replied, and they smiled at each other again. "Thank you for coming to collect me," she added, genuinely relieved that he had been able to get time off work at such short notice. "As soon as I received your telegram, I let the boss know I couldn't work today. I would never have left you waiting or needing to find your own accommodation in a strange town," he responded, looking her right in the eyes so she knew he was sincere. He led her to a horse and cart and placed her bag into the cart, offering his hand to help her up, which she gracefully accepted and took her seat. The cart was much smaller than she was accustomed to at home, but it was clearly well looked after, and she felt safe and comfortable enough. Cal untethered the horse and took his place up front so he could drive the horse and cart. He turned to her before he directed the horse to start the journey to his home. "I must tell you, the pastor has taken ill while visiting a nearby town, so he is not able to marry us immediately as we had hoped. But I have 2 bedrooms, and hope you will feel comfortable living at my home until he is well enough to come back to town and conduct the service." Worry etched on his brow. Rosie appreciated the fact that he had raised the matter so quickly and had not presumed she would be all right with it. It made her feel safe with him and helped her to trust him from the start. "That sounds fine for me, Cal. Thank you for asking me," she replied, smiling in response to his infectious smile him. Kate. Great. Then let's get going. It will take us almost 2 hours to get to Nugget Falls, but I have a lovely spot for us to stop off at for a comfort break halfway there, if that sounds all right for you. Rosie marveled at how considerate he seemed to be and eagerly nodded her agreement. They talked along the journey, although it was a little hard to hear each other over the sounds of the wooden wheels on the gravel roads. And Cal kept having to turn around to face her so that he could understand what she was saying. They also spent some time in silence, which was perfectly comfortable for Rosie, as she enjoyed taking in the scenery around them. She had never been anywhere quite as beautiful, with fields upon fields as far as the eye could see. In New York City, she had only really viewed houses wherever she walked, with the occasional park, but never such vastness. After a while, they came across a small community of sorts with just a few homes and a tiny coffee house. Cal pulled to a halt and jumped down, quickly tethering the horse. He then held out a hand for Rosie to help her down, which she accepted and nimbly hopped down with his help. She noticed how tall he was, quite a bit taller than she, as she was fairly petite in height and stature, which again made her feel safe in his presence. "I thought we could stop off here for some refreshment and a break, if that is all right?" he asked tentatively, and she smiled and nodded in agreement. She would take advantage of the moment and use the bathroom to freshen up, and was thankful that he seemed to have thought of her well-being. "This little place is my cousin's coffee house. Do you like coffee?" he asked proudly. "I do," she replied. "This looks lovely, thank you, Cal." They stayed in the coffee house for almost an hour, enjoying the coffee and some delicious hot cakes and conversing with Cal's cousin Jack and his wife and children. The customers came and went, and Rosie thought how wonderful it was to have a social space in an area that seemed quite remote. They then bid their farewells and promised to return soon to visit them again. Cal held his hand out again to help Rosie into the cart, but she paused before accepting. "Would it be all right to sit up front with you?" she asked tentatively. She was relieved when this was met with a huge smile, and he nodded his agreement eagerly. "Of course, whatever you would prefer," he replied as he moved to the front of the cart and held out his hand again so she could climb into the front seat. He then untethered the horse, climbed up beside her, and took hold of the reins. They both waved at his cousin and family as they set off, and Rosie hoped they would return to this lovely place again soon. "We should be able to hear each other better with me up here," she explained. He nodded and looked delighted, and they chatted with ease for the rest of the journey to his home, which would now become their home. Finally, they came to Nugget Falls, and Cal proudly pointed out the mine in which he worked. It was not long before they arrived at his cabin, the first in a row. Rosie thought it looked much smaller than she had imagined, but knew that was just because she had been accustomed to such wealth in her upbringing and hadn't imagined homes being so small. She thought it looked quaint and very well maintained. She could tell that Cal took pride in his home and took good care of it. There were many more cabins in a row on each side of the thin dirt track, and Cal explained that these were all homes of the miners who worked at the local mine. "We usually rent them, but my father was one of the bosses before he died, and they are allowed to buy them, so he purchased ours, and it now belongs to me. To us," he added kindly. "It's not much, but I hope you will like it," he said cautiously. "It looks lovely, Cal, really," she declared. "If your parents come to our wedding, there are some houses that are not in use yet, so it is all arranged for them to use one of them. So please don't worry about that," he said, and again Rosie marveled at how considerate and thoughtful he was. She nodded and smiled by way of thanks, but knew her mother and father would never stay in a place such as this, and that they would be rude to those who did. She had no intention of inviting them, and doubted they would come if she did. She followed him inside, and he proudly showed her the kitchen, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms, all immaculately kept. He placed her luggage in one of the bedrooms, gently onto the bed, letting her know which room was to be hers. She loved that Cal was able to keep his home so well. "It probably needs a woman's touch," he said as he watched her looking around the cabin, seemingly trying to gauge her reaction. I don't know, Cal. I think you have done a wonderful job with the place. It seems pretty perfect to me, she exclaimed honestly, and she noticed his cheeks redden as a small smile crept onto his face again. Chapter 7. Jessica Dawson could not believe what she was hearing from her friend Thomas. Cal Hardwick was living with a woman before marriage. She had missed last Sunday's church service as she hadn't felt well, and now she regretted not going as it had taken her days to discover the truth. Jessica had known Cal her whole life and had always dreamt of them marrying and having a family together. But he had never shown her any romantic interest over the years, and this had frustrated her. But until now, she had never had any reason to be jealous, as he had never shown any interest in anyone, to the best of her knowledge. She knew herself to be beautiful, as many people had told her that she was, so why did he never seem to notice her in that way? She had often wondered if her father's reputation had prevented him from getting close to her. She knew her father had a bad name in this area. He had only occasionally burgled premises in other towns and was suddenly branded as the local villain, whom everyone should stay away from. She knew he was not a dangerous man. In fact, he was ever so soft with her and had always been. They had it tough and struggled financially, so he did what he needed to provide for their family, and she respected him for that. There had been a time when Jessica had thought the threat of her father might bring Cal to her as her protector, or even out of fear of saying no to her because of her father's reputation, but nothing had seemed to work over the years. So, to now discover he was living with another woman made Jessica livid. Who could this woman be? Thomas had said that she was an outsider, so she was unlikely to know her, but she was certainly going to take the time to get to know her newest adversary. Jessica lived with her parents, only 6 doors from Cal, so she politely bid her farewell to Thomas, not wanting him to know the effect his words had on her. She made her way towards Cal's cabin at the end of the road, fighting back the fury that was building inside of her. She knocked on the wooden door, which Cal had taken hours polishing to make it look nicer and prevent rot from setting in over time. Very quickly the door opened, and the woman who stood inside the house almost took Jessica's breath away with her beauty. "Hello," the woman greeted quietly, with sadness in her eyes. "Good morning," Jessica said breezily as she pushed past the woman and went inside the home. Cal was not there, as she had expected, as he would be in the mine at this time of the day. "I am Jessica, a good friend of Cal. I thought I should introduce myself and get to know you," she said, attempting a genuine smile to disarm her new enemy. "Oh, hello," the woman's face brightened and somehow looked even more pretty, which did not please Jessica. "It's so good to meet you, Jessica. I am Rosie." She held her hand out to Jessica, who brushed it aside and stepped closer for a brief embrace, mainly so the interloping woman could not see her grimace. She had hoped she would be ugly at least, but this woman seemed to have both beauty and personality. "Shall we have coffee?" Jessica asked forthrightly, looking towards the stove. "Sure, I will put a fresh pot on," Rosie replied, her face slightly reddened, perhaps from the sudden excitement, or maybe from the unexpected embrace. Jessica wanted to figure this woman out quickly, know her weaknesses, and play on them. She was not going to sit back and watch Cal marry a woman he barely knew when she was right there waiting for him. Whilst Rosie bumbled about making the coffee, the pair talked about Rosie's past and how she had met Cal. But Jessica was finding it a challenge to get anything out of the girl, who looked to be a few years younger than her 24 years. Jessica wondered what kind of woman struggled to make a pot of coffee, but she left her to it, not wanting to help her adversary. "Sorry it has taken me so long to make the coffee," Rosie apologized, tears brimming in her sad eyes. "I can't seem to get the hang of these things, but I am sure I will. Cal says I will. He is ever so patient and kind." Jessica grimaced at her using Cal's name, jealous fury building inside of her once more. "Are you settling in all right?" Jessica asked, feigning interest, but actually wanting to find her weak spots so she could exploit them. She smiled as earnestly as she could muster, and Rosie smiled in return, her plump pink lips perfectly formed. "I have only been here a week, and Cal said it will get easier over time, but it is hard not knowing anyone and not really knowing how to do anything. We had a maid back home who would do all of this kind of thing for us." She gestured towards the coffee pot and then looked anxiously back at Jessica, seemingly wondering if she had said too much. Jessica sipped her coffee as she wondered to herself what kind of woman would have left a wealthy home for a life in a miner's cabin. The two lives seemed so different. Then it came to her. Cal must have placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride, and this is what he got. The thought of this added to the insult even further. She was right here, 6 doors away from Cal Hardwick, but he would rather order a bride he didn't even know than consider marrying a girl he had known all his life. Jessica thought they had always got along, regardless of him showing no romantic interest, and the betrayal hurt her. Perhaps she shouldn't have been so subtle with him. Perhaps she should have been more forthright and demanding. Well, there was no way she was going to just let this marriage go ahead. She was glad the pastor had been struck down by illness, as it gave her time to think about her options. It can take a bit of time to get used to this kind of life if it's different to the one you have lived before, I believe. I have always lived here, just a few doors up, so I have known Cal my whole life. Jessica felt her anger bubbling and knew she needed to get out of there before she said something she might regret. She needed to build trust with this outsider who couldn't so much as make a pot of coffee. "I am here for you, any time. Please just come and knock on my door any time, and I will come back and visit. If that's all right with you?" she asked, smiling as she stood from her wooden chair to indicate it was time for her to leave. Rosie stood too, seemingly confused as to why her new friend was suddenly leaving. "Thank you, Jessica. I truly appreciate your kindness, and I will let Cal know that you dropped by." Her gentle, kind voice reverberated through Jessica's body. How could Cal have chosen such a weak woman to be his wife? She would do all she could to prevent this marriage, but she had to be clever so as not to alienate Cal, and then she could become his wife. As it should be, she thought haughtily before nodding her response, saying goodbye and leaving the Hardwick home. Chapter 8. Cal had not anticipated the challenges a lady from out of town might face when he placed the advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. He worried for Rosie, as she seemed so upset most of the time as she tried to navigate her new life here in Nugget Falls. The rough and tumble of this life seemed to be hard for her to adapt to. They talked through the challenges she faced each day, and he tried to empathize and show understanding, but at times he felt frustrated that she was not able to settle easier. He couldn't understand a life in which she would not have learned many of the life skills he had taken for granted. He was finding it hard to work the long hours required of him, as well as be patient enough to support her in this way. But it was what he needed to do for his wife-to-be, and he often reminded himself of the letters they shared and the affection he had felt for her during that time. She was the same woman, but she was having a difficult time, and he would support her in finding her way through the harsh realities of frontier life in the West. It was a way of life that he had learned after a lifetime of living this way and knowing no different, so he needed to now find a way to help her to cope with it too. Jessica's surprise visit had been more of a surprise to Cal than it had been to Rosie when she had told him of the visit that evening when he returned from the mine. He had never really considered Jessica to be the caring type who would want to befriend a newcomer and help them to settle in, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was some ulterior motive. He felt guilty for doubting her kindness and made no mention of his concerns to Rosie. She had been so excited to have made a friend in Nugget Falls. It had been the happiest he had seen her so far, and he was pleased for her. Since the initial visit, Jessica had been around to visit Rosie every day, helping her to learn how to do the household chores that were all new to her. Cal was grateful for the company she provided for Rosie, but she still seemed to be struggling to keep the home and have dinner ready on his return. He didn't mind this at all, though, as it had become a nice ritual for them to cook together in the evening. He had always been the cook in the home since he was old enough to manage the knives and a hot stove because his father had been a terrible cook and ruined many a meal, so he had taken over as soon as he could. He liked cooking, and he really enjoyed cooking with Rosie, although it was an eye-opener to see just how little she knew. He supposed that was the life of a New York City person who had everything done for them, and he hoped she would be able to adjust to this life. "Good morning. How are you feeling this fine Sunday?" he asked Rosie as she entered the kitchen. She looked up and smiled at him as she heard his words. That smile would never get old for him. It was always so genuine and full of kindness and hope, seemingly no matter how she was feeling. "Good morning, Cal. I slept so well last night. The best night's sleep so far since I have been here. I must be getting used to the mattress and the darkness now," she replied positively. He hoped she would not get too comfortable with the mattress in the second bedroom, as he anticipated they would share his bedroom once they were married. Rosie had mentioned how dark it seemed at night in comparison to New York City, where they had streetlights. "Fantastic. I made some coffee already. May I get you one?" he asked courteously, to which she nodded and said thank you as she sat down at the table on the chair which had now become hers. He placed the coffee cup on the table before her and sat back on his own chair, enjoying the new routine they were creating for the only day each week that he didn't have to go to work. Prosody. He reopened his newspaper from the week before, always a week behind on reading the publications, because he never really found the time to read it during the week with his long hours in the mine. "Are we going to church again this morning?" she asked him as she sipped on her hot coffee, blowing it slightly beforehand. "Yes, I am intending to go and would love it if you would join me," Cal replied, hopeful that she felt up to it after a difficult week. He had enjoyed showing her off the previous Sunday, and he thought it would look a little peculiar if she didn't return this week. He knew there was already plenty of gossip and speculation about how he met this woman from out of town. He preferred not to add to the townsfolk's chatter. He was not too bothered that they knew about his advertising in the matrimonial times. He just didn't want Rosie affected. "I would be delighted to, please. Everyone was so lovely last week," she said. Cal recognized that the locals had all certainly been kind to her, but the people of this town were not too welcoming to strangers at the best of times, let alone anyone who appeared unexpectedly in their midst without explanation. "Great. Let's be ready to leave in half an hour and we can take a leisurely stroll there. Perhaps on the way back, we could stop at the park for a while." "It would be nice to take in the fresh air today," Cal suggested, relishing the prospect of air on his face and in his lungs after a week in the claustrophobic mine. Rosie nodded her eager approval, finished the last of her coffee, rose from the table, and announced that she was going to get ready. After she had left the kitchen, Cal allowed himself to imagine this being his forever, and he was excited and happy at that thought. He allowed himself to believe that these few initial difficulties could pass, and Rosie would be happy in this sleepy town where nothing really happened and everyone knew each other's business. The church service had been particularly poignant this Sunday, Cal thought. There was much mention of the sanctity of marriage and the benefits of having someone with whom to spend your life. The regular pastor was not yet back in church, as he was still quite unwell, and the stand-in pastor from out of town seemed to do things a little differently, which was sometimes good and sometimes not so good. Cal was intent, therefore, to wait until the pastor he had grown up with was well enough to return and perform the ceremony for him and Rosie. Cal had been rather caught off guard by the standoffish nature of his friends and the other members of the congregation that morning before the service began, many of whom he had known a lifetime and expected better of. He had thought some of them to be rather abrupt and even rude towards Rosie, and had more than once seen people eyeing her suspiciously. He had no idea what could have changed since the week before, when they had been pleasant to her, and she had done nothing but be nice and try to fit in. Luckily, Jessica sat with them and was able to shield Rosie from the glances and whispering, but Cal had noticed and was not impressed. He made sure to show his displeasure through his facial expressions to those who were being rude and disrespectful. Chapter 9. Jessica enjoyed playing this game, probably more than she should ever admit. She had the occasional pang of guilt about Rosie's gratitude over her friendship, but then her jealousy and resentment returned to fuel her behavior. Church had been particularly entertaining on Sunday. She had spent the last week talking to the townsfolk who she knew liked to have a good gossip. She had shared with them in confidence that her new friend Rosie had admitted to her that she felt as though she was above the people of this town and didn't understand how they could live such menial lives. Each person, she told, accused Rosie of being a spoilt city girl who was unappreciative of the community in which she now lived. Of course, she had defended her new friend, not wanting to be caught out as being the one to spread the gossip around their beloved town of Nugget Falls, so she still said nice things about her. Jessica had watched as many of the familiar townsfolk sneered at Rosie as she made her way into the church, whispering behind her back about what a spoilt woman she was and that she was not welcome if she wasn't going to try to fit in. Jessica sat with the happy couple throughout the service and pretended to shield Rosie from the sideways glances of those around them. But she knew Cal had seen it, and he looked outraged and ready to explode. Perhaps this would cause an argument between the two of them, she wondered hopefully, pleased with her attempts at sabotage so far. After the service, Rosie had gone to the bathroom, which left Jessica alone with Cal. He had confided in her that he had noticed the townsfolk's disrespect and rudeness towards his wife-to-be. Jessica conceded that she had noticed it too, and he had thanked her for trying to protect her from it, saying that it had not gone unnoticed. She had assured Cal that she would try to protect them both, but warned him that the townsfolk had never taken to new people from outside of Nugget Falls, and that he shouldn't be too surprised by their reactions. He had expressed his frustration that they had been nicer to her the week before, and that he simply couldn't understand the change of heart. She had listened and agreed with his every word, eager to show him how kind and considerate she was, as well as a good listener when he needed her to be. She was sure to secure Cal's affection by being there for them both through their difficulties until there was no other option than for Rosie to go back to where she came from and leave them to it. She was never going to fit in anyway, Jessica knew, so she was doing her a favor and preventing them from dragging out the inevitable. Now Jessica was at Cal's house, teaching Rosie how to cook decent evening meals. To Jessica, she was a spoilt city girl who knew little to nothing about living in the real world. But she knew she needed to keep being nice to her, however frustrating it was. "I am so glad you met Cal and were able to come all the way to Nugget Falls, Rosie," she lied through gritted teeth. "He had been ever so lonely since his father died, so I am sure you are a welcome distraction for him," she stated nonchalantly. "I think he also wanted to start to build his life and start a family," Rosie replied, while stirring the vegetables and locking concerned eyes with Jessica. It was so easy to reel her in, Jessica thought, impressed with her own planning. "Oh yes, of course, no doubt. It's about time he settled down and stopped with that wandering eye." Jessica replied with a sly smile. "What do you mean? Cal said he had never had a serious relationship." Rosie's voice was shaky as she asked the question that she no doubt did not want the answer to. "Oh no, don't worry. He is telling you the truth. Prosody rate percent. I have never known him to be committed to anyone. It's hard to when you are known to not be the most loyal romantic. To be honest, I never thought he was going to settle down at all, so you are doing better than most of us here ever thought." Jessica reveled in the reaction of her new enemy. Rosie stopped what she was doing to sit at the table nearby. She put her head in her hands, slightly shaking her long brown hair as she seemed to fight to keep the words from her head. "Sorry, Rosie, I didn't mean to upset you. I was saying you have done well to change him so quickly." She easily faked her remorse. "But this all seems so far from what he has been telling me. I have nowhere to go if he changes his mind, and goes back to his old ways. My mother and father would certainly not take me back now after my leaving in that way and failing to so much as even contact them yet. She began to sob, so Jessica gave her a clean handkerchief and patted her shoulder as gently and sincerely as she could. I am sure they would welcome a lovely girl like you back. I bet they are missing you. But that's not what I was saying. I think you have changed Cal. He seems content with you. She added with an undeniable undertone that she knew Rosie picked up on. Anyway, I have to get going. I have plenty to do before the big day, Jessica said, hoping for the reaction she wanted. The big day? Rosie asked, raising her head from her hands and looking at her, her eyes red and damp. Yes, silly, Christmas Day. It's a big deal here, and I am preparing the house with a tree and candles to brighten the place up a little before we all get together on Christmas Day. She enlightened her, thankful that all the pieces were falling into place. Oh, does Cal normally celebrate? My family never really did anything at home. We just went to the seasonal dinner parties, Rosie explained, much to Jessica's amusement. Dinner parties. In Nugget Falls, they could only dream of being the type to throw and attend dinner parties. Yes, of course, we all do at Nugget Falls. It's the most wonderful time of the year, and certainly our community's highlight. I don't think he has really celebrated since his father died, though, but I am sure he is eager to get back to the festivities, Jessica confided quietly, happy that her plan was beginning to take form. Chapter 10. Rosie awoke with some excitement. She knew Cal would have already left for the mines for the day, and that normally filled her with a sense of dread. But with a new focus, she was more positive as she had something productive to fill her time. Since arriving at Nugget Falls, Rosie had felt completely out of her depth. The new lifestyle was so different from that of New York City, and it was taking her quite some time to adjust. She felt ashamed of her previous life and how lazy and uninformed she had been. She hadn't even known how to brew a pot of coffee, as they had always had servants to do that for them. She knew she had been fortunate growing up wealthy, but she also felt disadvantaged that it had prevented her from developing the life skills she now needed. She was delighted to have met Jessica Dawson, who seemed to be a very kind lady from only a few doors away. Jessica had taken it upon herself to try to teach her how to run the home, as she herself had learned under the excellent tutelage of her mother. Rosie wondered if she had ever learned anything useful from her mother. All she had prepared her for was attending dinner parties and being a wife to a wealthy man with staff. But she tried to block these thoughts from her mind, as it would do no good for her to build up resentment towards her parents. Jessica had been her only friend since arriving in Nugget Falls, and she was grateful for every moment spent with her. She was caring and kind and always looked out for Rosie, even when the local townspeople were unfriendly towards her. She had known it could be tricky to win the townsfolk over in such a small community, so she was taking each day at a time. Rosie quickly and purposefully washed and dressed before heading to the kitchen and helping herself to the hot coffee that Cal had left on the stove for her. She still hadn't mastered it, despite all the help from Jessica. Perhaps she wasn't cut out for a life of keeping a home, but luckily Cal was an expert at this, having done it for so long already. He was very patient and understanding and helped her every evening. She hoped her time with Jessica would start to pay off soon, and she would start to get the meals right, as she knew Cal would be so proud of her. She placed her paper, dip pen, and inkwell in front of her on the wooden table and began to write. Dear Mother and Father, I hope you are both well. I am sorry it has taken me some time to write since leaving, and I hope the time has allowed your forgiveness. I am sure it came as quite a shock that I left, but I had to do what was right for me. I wanted to let you know that I am adjusting to my new life, which is very different from the one I lived in New York City. I have not yet married Mr. Hardwick, as the pastor has been very unwell, but we are hopeful he will recover and return to Nugget Falls soon so we can become man and wife. I am staying in Cal's home, which is a quaint cabin near the mine in which he works. Of course, I have my own bedroom until we marry, and Cal has been the most perfect gentleman. I think I will have a happy life with him. I have enclosed my new address and hope you will feel able to write back, as I would love to hear how you are doing now that you don't have me to worry about. Cal has said that you would be very welcome to join us for our wedding, which we are now expecting will be after Christmas. There is no room in his cabin for guests, but there is an unused cabin further up the track which he has reserved for you if you do decide to come. Everyone is so lovely here. I think you might like it, and it would be nice to be able to show you my new home and how independent I am becoming. I will leave it for you to consider, and when I know the date, I will send you a telegram accordingly. Your daughter, Rosie. She breathed a sigh of relief once she had written the letter she had been delaying since she arrived. She wanted to appear positive and upbeat in the letter, which was something she hadn't felt until more recently. She folded the paper, sealed it with her blue wax, and wrote the address of her old house on the front. Since she was headed into town that day, she wanted to get it sent off before she changed her mind. She finished the last of her now cold coffee, rose from her chair, and rinsed her cup. She would later set her mind to the task of brewing a fresh pot of coffee for Cal's return. Jessica seemed to have shown her so many different ways of making a pot of coffee that she felt even more confused now than she had been when she arrived. Jessica had shown her options so she could find her own preferred way of brewing the coffee. Her new friend was oh so helpful, not bossing her around, but guiding her in her own way. Rosie put on her white gaiters and fastened the delicate laces up the front. She needed the best protection for her feet in this cold. She pulled on her woolen coat, hopeful that the fur trim would help to keep her warm. She wondered if the clothing she wore contributed towards the community not yet taking to her. She hoped she didn't come across as the rich girl from out of town, but these were the only clothes she owned, so she had no choice but to wear them. Cal had explained that they were experiencing the coldest winter he had known in years. He had joked that the only way he could get warm at the moment was down in the mines, which were always extremely hot. She braced herself against the cold wind as she opened the door and stepped outside. She walked quickly and purposefully into the center of town, where the stores were, only looking up as she passed Jessica's house. She hoped to see her and request her company during her visit to town, but there was no sign of her as she passed. Mr. Eccles eyed Rosie with suspicion when she walked into the store, quickly closing the door to prevent the cold air from following her. She had met him a number of times now, so she wondered why he still seemed to be standoffish with her. He was better with her when Cal was around, but still not particularly pleasant. She asked for her letter to be posted and then made the payment, happy that she could no longer change her mind. She then collected the groceries she needed and asked for them to be paid on their credit as normal. "It is cash only, please, Miss Tyler," Mr. Eccles stated coldly. Rosie looked around her at the other shoppers who were very aware of what was happening, but chose to look the other way. "But Mr. Hardwick always buys on credit and settles at the end of the month," Rosie replied, tears filling her eyes as she remembered that she only brought enough money for the postage cost. "You are not Mr. Hardwick, Miss Tyler. You do not have credit here, so we will need cash payment, please." She looked at the groceries she needed, some of which were for their planned Christmas Day feast. "Please can you keep them to one side, Mr. Eccles, and I will hurry home for the cash?" she asked quietly. He nodded and told her how much it would be, then placed the groceries rather abruptly at his feet. Her eyes stung with tears as she made the walk back to the cabin. She wondered why Mr. Eccles had decided he couldn't trust her. She had not done anything as far as she knew to cause any concern in the community. This was her first shopping trip on her own, though, so perhaps this was customary, and Cal had forgotten to tell her as he hadn't known she would be shopping alone that day. Once back in the cabin, she allowed a few tears to fall, but only for a moment as she needed to find the cash to settle her purchase. She found the purse she had brought with her and grabbed the money from there, fairly confident that she would not be needing that money to travel back to New York City now. Rosie checked her face in the small mirror in the bathroom before making her way back out of the door. She was a proud woman and didn't want anyone to know she had been crying over groceries. She returned and purchased her shopping, leaving the store abruptly and feeling shame as the other shoppers in the store watched on, no doubt buying their goods on credit. She wondered if she would be able to pluck up the courage to go to the store on her own in the future, and thought she might always have to wait until Cal was home and able to go with her, as he had done previously. She had been hoping to gain some independence, but this had put a dampener on her plans for now. As Rosie walked home for the second time that day, this time laden with her shopping, she again looked towards her friend's cabin, hopeful for a friendly ear to share her thoughts with. But there was no sign of movement from within. She didn't want to knock on the door and disturb Jessica, as she was most likely busy doing something useful. She scurried home and gladly shut the cabin door behind her, taking a deep breath in the relative safety of home. Chapter 11. Jessica had already heard news of the happenings at the store the previous day, and she had been filled with joy. She had seen Rosie walking to and from the store a few times the previous day, careful not to let herself be seen through her windows, as she wanted her new friend to have to cope on her own. Her devious plan was working, and now that she had laid the foundations to make Rosie as unhappy as possible in Nugget Falls, she could focus her attention on Cal. "Oh, how awful! How are you feeling now?" Jessica asked Rosie, referring to the previous day after Rosie had told her all about it over dinner. "I feel a bit embarrassed, but I'm sure it is just because I am new to the area." "That's what you think, isn't it?" she asked Cal, desperate for reassurance. "Yes, although it's still not good enough, and I will be having words when I am next there. I have been a loyal customer to Mr. Word Eccles my whole life, so I would have expected better from him," Cal stated, clearly annoyed at the situation and defensive of his bride-to-be, which irked Jessica somewhat. "You must have known what people from this town might be like towards an outsider, Cal," Jessica said. "You know these townsfolk well enough to expect this kind of thing from them. Maybe it will get better over time, but the people around here don't like change, and especially don't like it when people don't understand the miner's life." She smiled kindly in the direction of Rosie, so as to not sound as though she was being too harsh and taking sides. "It will get easier. Everything will over time." "Thank you, Jessica. I honestly don't know what I would do without you," she exclaimed. "You always look out for me. She even made this dinner tonight, Cal. We were going to pretend I did it myself to try to impress you, but I just can't lie to you," she said, just as Jessica had hoped, as now Cal knew the delicious meal he had just enjoyed had in fact been made by her. Cal laughed at her honesty and her confession. "Well, the coffee was mighty fine tonight, too," he declared, trying to appease Rosie. "I made that, too," Jessica admitted, enjoying the praise, even if it hadn't been directed at her. If this kept up, how would he be able to resist her when he realized that Jessica was able to do all that did not come naturally to Rosie? He would surely be able to see that she would be the better option as a miner's wife. She understood him better than Rosie ever could or would. They all laughed lightheartedly, and Rosie declared that she would make the evening meal and the coffee the following night. She invited Jessica to join them, but she declined. She would let her fall flat on her face without her help this time. She made her excuses, explaining that she was meeting up with a friend. While Rosie was in the bathroom, Cal spoke to Jessica in a hushed voice. "Thank you for helping Rosie. It's not been easy for her, so I do appreciate your support, and I know she does too." "I don't need any thanks, Cal. We have been friends our whole lives, and I am only too happy to help where I can." "I don't think it will ever be easy for Rosie, unfortunately. This is not the kind of life she is used to, and she may never get used to it fully, but she is trying, so the least I can do is help her," Jessica replied, her eyes deliberately solemn so that Cal realized the extent of his dilemma. "You don't think she will ever fit in?" he asked, alarm showing on his face. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to worry you," she added hastily. "Maybe she will. You will see over time. But it must be hard for an outsider to come here, especially one who has clearly lived a privileged life. It's a big adjustment, especially to become a miner's wife." She probably didn't know you would be away at work for so long each day. It's been a lot for her to take in, she said, enjoying manipulating the situation. Yes, you're right. She has had a lot to cope with in the short time she has been here. Hopefully, it will begin to get a little easier, especially once we are married. They will have to accept her then, he stated, still clearly upset by how the townsfolk were treating Rosie. Jessica felt her anger start to build again. How could he be so worried and protective of this woman, who clearly was never about to enjoy the kind of life he could give her? I don't think she's ever going to be a natural in the kitchen, though. Jessica winked at him, and they both laughed quietly, knowing this was most likely to be true. Jessica enjoyed feeling as though they were conspiring against her. Chapter 12. Rosie could tell he was not enjoying the meal she had taken so long to prepare. She wondered how she could still be getting it so wrong. She had tried to be adventurous, making pea soup with the stock from the beef she had previously cooked. Perhaps she had added too much salt, but she knew she had followed the instructions from Jessica and had used only the right ingredients. She had, after all, double-checked the amounts. She wasn't even enjoying the meal herself, so she couldn't expect Cal to. After a hard day working in the mine, the least he should expect was a decent hot meal in the evening. She was embarrassed and felt her cheeks flush red. She wondered if she was ever going to be good enough to be his wife and to be able to look after him as a wife should. Please don't eat it if you're not enjoying it. I can make you a plate of cold bread and meats if you prefer. She was desperate for Cal to have a substantial meal. She surely couldn't get a cold meal wrong, she thought. It's all right. This isn't bad at all. He tried to placate her, but they both knew it was bad, and she didn't like that he wasn't honest with her, although she appreciated that he was just trying to spare her feelings. Cal, really, I know it's not nice. I am not enjoying it myself, she replied honestly, hoping for the same honesty in return. Well, I'm going to finish mine. It's not as bad as you're saying, and I am not one to waste food. Please stop worrying, he reassured, tucking into his bowl once more. Rosie moved her food around her bowl, but really only ate a little more, whilst Cal finished off his bowl, wiping it clean with the bread and butter she had prepared for them. He then declared that he was full, which she was glad about at least. She worried about him going to bed on an empty stomach after burning off so much energy in the mine and needing to do the same the following day. They went for a stroll that evening after dinner. They tried to do the same every evening so that Cal could enjoy the fresh air and clear his lungs after a day in the mine. As they walked, Cal politely said hello to everyone they passed. The passers-by greeted him in response, and Rosie felt that growing unease in her stomach when he spoke to the ladies. She had tried to shake off what Jessica had let slip to her about Cal's wandering eye, but it was undeniably affecting her and putting her on edge. She tried to smile and say hello as politely as Cal, but she knew it was not coming across as genuine, and she worried this might affect her status in the community even more. "Are you all right?" Cal asked her, interrupting her thoughts. "Yes, of course, I am fine, thank you." She tried to keep her voice calm and not let him see how worried she was becoming that he might choose another woman over her. Not only would that leave her with nowhere to go, but she had actually become very fond of him and wanted nothing more than to become his wife. Even if she wasn't quite wife material yet, she knew he was patient enough for her to learn. "Are you sure? You don't quite seem yourself. You seem a little tense. Has anything happened?" he asked carefully, and she knew he was referring to what had happened with Mr. Eccles in the grocery store and was wondering if something similar had happened. "Oh no, please don't worry. Nothing at all has happened. I haven't even left the house today," she assured him, reprimanding herself for allowing him to read her so well. She found it hard to imagine that what Jessica had told her about Cal was true, as he always seemed like such a gentleman, but why would she make that up? She had to trust her friend, who had known him much longer than she had, and trust that this was just Cal's old ways and that he was now a better person. She needed to let it go from her mind so that it prevented any negative effect on their budding relationship. Tell me about your day, she prompted, hopeful of diverting his attention and genuinely wanting to know about his day down the mine. She was fascinated by his tales about the mines. It was a whole other world from what she was accustomed to, and it sounded very exciting. Chapter 13. Another Sunday had come along already, and Jessica had ramped up her plan to separate the couple, have Rosie move back to precious New York City, and leave her with her man. She sat with them throughout the church service, noticing the looks they shared at certain points throughout the Bible readings. It only fueled her rage and made her all the more determined. She simply could not afford for Cal to fall for this woman. They milled about and chatted with the other members of the congregation after the service, as was customary. Rosie looked uncomfortable and out of place, Jessica thought happily. People were still keeping her at arm's length and had even started to avoid Cal, which she hadn't planned for, but figured it couldn't do any harm. Walking back home together, the three chatted about the service and the calm weather. Jessica was waiting for an opportunity to make her announcement, but they were getting closer to her home, and she was running out of time. "Would you like to come for a coffee?" asked Rosie as if reading her mind. Jessica nodded her head eagerly. "Oh, yes, please. That would be lovely. Your coffee-making skills have certainly been improving," Jessica said playfully, winking at her friend, who laughed in return. They all sat at the wooden table in the kitchen, each on a hard-backed wooden chair, and, whilst Rosie busied herself at the stove making the fresh pot of coffee, Jessica took her opportunity. "So, what do you make of this gold strike, Cal?" she asked nonchalantly, as though he must already have heard about it. He looked up at her, a startled and confused expression on his handsome face. "Gold strike? Where? It's certainly not in Nugget Falls," he exclaimed as he sat up in his chair, a show of interest as she lured him in. "No, silly, of course not here. I overheard my father talking about it with one of his associates who visited yesterday. Apparently, it is in a small mining town called Halt, or Hulk. Oh no, I think it was Hale." "Do you know it?" she asked, as though she had little interest in the subject. "Yes, I do know Hale. It's a few days' ride away. Not far at all. Is it a big find? Do you know? Is it worth other miners going to help out?" he asked, curious as to what this could mean for him. She knew him well enough to know he had always been eager to hit it big in the mines, so that he no longer had to continue with the work that had ultimately killed his father. "I didn't listen too much, to be honest, and I thought you would have heard about it. I thought it would have been a topic of conversation amongst all the miners, but maybe they are keeping it to themselves and planning to go and see what they can get." She pondered, making him think about his coworkers. Rosie made her way back to the table with mugs for them all, which she placed carefully in front of them. The coffee looked very dark, so Jessica could tell she had again used too much coffee, but she was polite and would drink it anyway, as would Cal, to keep Rosie happy. "What's this?" Rosie asked inquisitively, having not heard the chatter while making the coffee. "Oh, just some gold strike nearby," Jessica said, as if it was nothing of interest. "It's not just a gold strike," stated Cal quickly, his excitement clearly growing the more he thought about it. "It's only 2 or 3 days' ride away. It's within our reach," he said, deep in his own thoughts. "Are you going to go to it?" asked Rosie innocently. Cal looked up at her as though he hadn't even contemplated such a thing. "I can't leave you here alone, especially not at this time of the year," he said, and Jessica was sickened by his consideration for her feelings. "Don't be silly. Rosie would never be alone. I am here." Jessica interrupted. "Jessica is right. And anyway, isn't this what you have always worked for? What you have waited for your whole life?" He nodded his head in response, a small smile forming on his mouth as he realized that he is likely to eventually strike it rich. "You must go. Who among the other men are going?" she asked, thinking of his coworkers. "Well, I don't know. No one has mentioned it to me, so either they don't know or they are keeping it to themselves." "So would you go alone?" Rosie asked. "I think I will have to if no one mentions it when I am in the mine tomorrow. If they have struck gold in the way that it sounds, they will be glad of any help and welcome me, I am sure. I will be digging out gold for them too, not just for myself." When will you go? Jessica asked. The sooner the better, I guess, before it is all gone. I know Christmas is looming, but if you're not back in time, Rosie can come to us for dinner that day. I won't let her be alone on her first Christmas here in Nugget Falls, she said kindly, and they both looked at her appreciatively. I have to be at work tomorrow, but I will need to come up with a reason not to go in for the rest of the week and hopefully head off on Tuesday. If I give myself 3 days to get there, 3 days to mine for the gold, and then 3 days to return, I should make it back on Christmas morning at the very latest. Hopefully the night before, he suggested, to which Rosie nodded her head in agreement, and Jessica's heartbeat quickened as her plan was put into action. Chapter 14. Rosie waved Cal off on his journey, wondering when he would return. He had said he hoped to be back on Christmas Eve or, at the latest, Christmas morning, but she feared it might not work out that way. She knew, though, that he had to chase his dream. None of the other miners had mentioned the gold strike to Cal, and so he had kept it to himself and had taken off as ill. Rosie and Jessica were prepared to lie about him being laid up in bed with the flu and not taking any visitors while just sleeping it off. Her stomach was in knots as she watched him ride off on his trusty horse, heading north to Hale and the promise of gold. He was a competent rider, so she knew she need not worry about him in that regard, but he was going to be on this journey for days, and she wondered if he would indeed be welcomed with open arms. She had heard her father talk about miners going from town to town, chasing the gold strikes, and he had not been complimentary at all. But then she didn't really trust her father's words or opinion on matters such as this, so she was sure he would be all right. Thinking about her father had her remember the letter she had sent to them. They wouldn't have received it yet, probably another week or so, and she was not expecting a letter in return until mid-January. Unless, of course, the pastor made a recovery and they decided to marry when Cal returned. In that case, she would send them a telegram as she promised. I know it's possibly the worst time for Cal to have left you alone, but try not to feel let down by him, Jessica said, placing a reassuring hand on Rosie's delicate shoulder. Rosie had never voiced such a concern and was surprised by her friend's words. Oh no, I don't feel let down by him at all. I hadn't even thought about it, to be honest. I know it's what he needs to do, and he will be back by Christmas, as he said. She smiled at Jessica, who smiled back sweetly, but not convincingly. Hopefully you are right. It is a worry when they go away, isn't it? She asked, looking at Rosie thoughtfully. Mother always hated it when father went away. She never said, but I think she used to worry he would have eyes for another woman whilst in another town. At least you don't need to worry about that. Rosie's stomach did a flip as she listened to her friend's words about her mother. She would be lying to herself if she said she hadn't considered this already, and with her recent worries about Cal straying, it had been compounded by the thought of not seeing him for 10 days or more. But she was not going to admit this to anyone. That would be a betrayal of Cal and their relationship. No, I am very lucky in that respect, she replied, her eyes to the ground, knowing she was an ineffective liar and that her eyes would give her away. It was the way in which Cal always knew when something was amiss with her. Let's make the most of the time we have with Cal away. What have you planned decorations-wise for the cabin? Jessica asked, her eyes lighting up at the thought of the festive season ahead. I hadn't really thought that far ahead yet, but I guess I should make it look really special for his return. A surprise for him for our first Christmas together, Rosie said, her mind going into overdrive as she considered what she could do to brighten up the cabin and make it special for them. Can we get a tree around these parts? She asked Jessica. Absolutely. I am going to get mine tomorrow. Come with me, and then we can choose the candles with which to decorate them. Jessica replied enthusiastically, and Rosie felt the excitement building at having a distraction while Cal was away. She was delighted to have a way to bring him joy when he returned, whether he had found gold or not. Rosie wasn't particularly bothered about whether Cal found riches or not. She had lived a wealthy life, and it wasn't for her. The people were often pretentious and not real in so many ways. But she knew that Cal was so hungry for this success because he wanted to be able to give up the dangerous work which killed his father, so she was of course supportive of his decision. She was also hopeful that if he did strike gold, it did not change him in any negative way. Perfect. Also, I was wondering if you would be able to come to the store with me in a few days, please. I want to buy the rest of the groceries for a Christmas Day feast, but I am still so ashamed of not having cash on me the last time I was in the store that I don't really want to show my face on my own. I have cash on the ready this time around, so there should be no awkwardness, she added, a small smile on her face as her cheeks reddened from the embarrassing memory. Of course, no problem at all. I will be shopping for our feast too. I have insisted that Mother take the day off, so I am cooking for the Christmas Day meal, Jessica replied kindly. Rosie felt better now that she had a plan of action, knowing that when Cal returned, she would have a beautiful tree complete with candles and a meal prepared that would be fit to remember. She had time to practice and make sure she got it just right. Chapter 15. Jessica knocked on Cal's door at exactly 10 in the morning, just as she and Rosie had planned. She couldn't bring herself to think of it as Rosie's home, as it was just a matter of time before Cal came to his senses and Rosie went back to city where she belonged. "Good morning," exclaimed an excited-looking Rosie as she opened the door and stepped out, quickly closing the door behind her to prevent too much of the cold air from getting in. Jessica couldn't help but be amused by the outdoor coat with its fur lining and her special winter boots. It was certainly not the kind of attire the townsfolk of Nugget Falls saw often, and it was little wonder that she had alienated them somewhat. Perhaps the same would have happened had Jessica not intervened in her own special way by discreetly steering the residents against her. Her plans had now reached a new level, and as they walked the short distance to select a tree, Jessica considered her plan. She was going to help Rosie choose a big tree, too big, really, for Cal's small wooden cabin. She was then going to help her find the most perfect candles with which to decorate the tree. She was banking on Rosie's carelessness, raising Cal's cabin in a blaze, which would surely put an end to her and Cal. Better still, if Rosie was to die in the cabin fire, it would look like an accident for which Rosie was solely responsible. She knew she was onto a winner with this plan, which was really foolproof, given that Rosie had proved herself thoroughly inadequate. She briefly wondered if she might be taking it too far, but she thought fondly of all the conversations she had with her father over the years. He had always told her never to settle for less than what she deserved, and to do everything in her power to get what she wanted, even if others were not likely to understand. So she stuck to her plan, knowing that if her father ever discovered what she had done, he would be proud. Maybe she would even tell him someday. They walked around the small copse of trees, all very similar to one another in reality, looking for a perfect one for their needs. "Oh, look at this one," Jessica exclaimed as she approached the biggest one they had seen so far. She could tell it would reach the ceiling in the cabin, and its span was far too big, but Rosie seemed to love it immediately, brushing the branches with her hands and looking it up and down. "She's beautiful," Rosie exclaimed in awe, looking from the tree to her only friend in this town. "You simply must get her," Jessica proclaimed, referring to it by gender as Rosie had done, humoring her despite thinking it ridiculous. "No, Jessica, you saw her first. You must take this one," Rosie pleaded, too polite for her own good, Jessica thought. If the shoe had been on the other foot, Jessica would have taken it without a second thought about Rosie. But for this plan to work, she needed the tree to be in the right home. "Rosie, it is your first Christmas together. You need to have the most beautiful tree, and she is most certainly the most beautiful tree we have seen so far. I will find another that will be just as perfect," Jessica assured her, and Rosie nodded her head in thoughtful agreement. Jessica had her man friend chop the tree and drag it to the cabin for Rosie. They practically skipped around the copse until Jessica had chosen her tree. Such was the excitement building in Rosie. Jessica prompted Rosie to look at the taller candles after they had selected the trees. Jessica had told her that she did not need new candles, as she had the ones she had used the previous year. She lied to Rosie, telling her she had the tall ones, but in fact hers were much shorter. She explained that the taller ones would last longer and that Cal would be happy with that. Innocent. Jessica just wanted them to be as dangerous as could be, so that her plan could be executed without any problem. The two made their way back to their homes, full of festive spirit, and each focused on their own Christmas plans. Jessica had noticed the sideways glances Rosie had received from everyone they passed, but Rosie seemed oblivious, so happy with her plans to make this Christmas perfect for her husband-to-be, thought Jessica bitterly. Chapter 16. Rosie couldn't believe the size of the tree after she had helped Jessica's acquaintance to drag it into the house. Together, they positioned it as best they could, making sure it was upright and sturdy. After the man had left, and she had a chance to look at the tree inside the cabin, she sat on the wooden chair, wondering if she had made a mistake in her choice. It was so much bigger than it had seemed outside in the woodlands. It was going to be a challenge to position the candles in a way that they did not impose on the furniture. She needed to be sure it was safe. This home was Cal's pride and joy, and she couldn't afford to make any serious mistakes. There was a knock on the door, and after Rosie called out that it was open, Jessica swiftly rushed in, the cold air biting at her heels. "Oh, lovely," Jessica exclaimed loudly as she was faced with the tree. "It's too big, isn't it?" "Do you think I should choose another?" asked Rosie, tears stinging her eyes as she realized she had made yet another mistake. No, not at all. It is perfect, Rosie. Once you have the candles on, it will look so pretty. Cal is going to love it. I remember how his father always chose big trees too," Jessica falsely reassured her, and Rosie instantly felt some relief and stood to titivate the branches to be more compact. "Honestly, you have nothing to worry about. It is simply perfect," she assured her grateful friend. "How is yours?" Rosie asked Jessica, knowing hers was considerably smaller. "Lovely. Not as lovely as yours, of course, but still lovely. I can't stop and chat, though, because I want to get back to decorating it. Mother and I always do it together as soon as it arrives, but I really wanted to pop around and check you were happy with your choice," Jessica replied, opening the door and promptly heading home. Rosie looked back at her tree and couldn't help but wish she had a relationship with her mother, which meant they did things together like Jessica and her mother. She would have loved to decorate a tree with her mother, but she always said it was too messy a job and got people in to do it. Rosie had never even been allowed to go near the tree, let alone dress it, as her mother did not want it to get messy. The sadness that she and her mother had never had a loving relationship was one that would always stay with her, Rosie thought. She stopped herself from pondering on it too much by getting up from her cold, hard chair and collecting the candles from her bedroom, where she had put them when she came back. She wanted Cal to be surprised by the candles when he returned. After stacking the fire with more wood to keep the house as warm as she could in the bitter cold, she set to positioning the candles on the branches of the tree, securing them with wire, rather than melted wax, as she had seen others do with smaller candles. She didn't want them falling off and causing a fire. Rosie was relieved that she had purchased the taller candles, as the smaller ones would have looked odd on such a small tree, she thought. Jessica had been right when she advised her. She was so glad to have a friend in Nugget Falls, someone she could rely on to help and support her. She had never really even had friends in New York City, as all the girls her age seemed to be very different from her. They were obsessed with finding the right man, getting married, and having a family as fast as could be, and that had never really been Rosie's aim. She wanted a man that she loved, a man who was kind, gentle, and considerate, not the most wealthy or eligible. The room was getting darker, the small cabin windows showing the sky beginning to darken because of the dreary weather and the night starting to fall. Rosie considered lighting her candles, but decided not to waste them before Cal returned. She wished she could contact him somehow. He had only been gone a few days, but she thought about him constantly and wished she knew how his journey was going. She supposed he would arrive at the mine in hail the following day, ready to work. Chapter 17. You should at least see what they look like lit when it gets a little darker later. It's the only way you can really tell that the tree is dressed right, Jessica told Rosie, not for the first time since she had decorated the tree 2 days before. But I just don't want to waste them before Cal gets back. These candles are not cheap, and I want him to see the full effect over Christmas, Rosie explained again. But now Jessica noticed some hesitation in her response and knew it was time to ramp up the manipulation. I understand that completely, but lighting them just once to make sure the tree is equally dressed all over would not waste much of those big candles. Once you're happy with it, you can blow them out, having only used a small amount of the wax and leaving plenty for over Christmas once Cal is back, she said convincingly, impressed with her own skills of coercion. Perhaps you are right, Rosie finally exclaimed as she looked at the tree and its candles. It could be misbalanced and look silly when lit, I suppose, she agreed, her voice showing her nerves at getting it wrong for Cal's return. Jessica feigned consideration of her situation, whilst inwardly wondering how a woman could be so ridiculous in wanting to get everything so perfect for a man, even if that man was the very handsome and hard-working Cal Hardwick. Now you are thinking straight, she replied eagerly. Shall we say this evening? I can pop back after dinner, and when it is dark enough, you can light your candles, and we can both sit back and check that they are positioned perfectly. Oh, you don't need to do that. I am sure you won't want to come back out in the cold, Rosie said, as she tinkered with a candle that had started to twist around a little on its branch. It's not a far walk, and it will be so much easier with a second pair of eyes. Mother and I always do the same so that we can help each other to get it perfect between us. I am more than happy to come over and help. Anyway, I am sure you can have a nice hot pot of coffee on the go when I come over, so I would soon warm up with that. You are managing the fire really well now, so it's not cold in here at all, Jessica lied, wanting to be present for the lighting of the tree candles. Jessica had planned to leave Rosie to it and trust that a disaster would ensue, what with the size of that tree and the candles, the fact that the cabin was made of wood and that Rosie was seemingly quite clumsy. She was quite certain it would go terribly wrong for Rosie without any help from her, but she didn't want to leave it to chance and wanted to ensure it went her way. Of course, she would get out unscathed and would be in a position to let everyone know just how irresponsible her friend had been with the size of the tree and the candles and how she had tried to stop her. All right, that would be lovely then. Thank you, Rosie replied, smiling at her friend. Or you can stay for dinner if you would like to. I am making a vegetable soup, but you are welcome to join me. There will be plenty to go around, she said kindly, and Jessica shook her head. Thank you, but Mother is cooking today, and she will have already catered for me, so I had better not. Mother can't cope with any waste or leftovers, she added honestly, wishing she could have stayed for dinner so that she didn't have to go out into the cold in between visits. Cal said something similar just the other day. The dinner I had made was really awful, but he insisted on eating it even though it wasn't very nice. He said he didn't like waste. I don't really understand that. If you don't like it, you surely shouldn't eat it, especially not to be polite. I know he was trying not to offend me, but I would rather he hadn't eaten it. I could have made him something else, Rosie shared, her face flushed as she was clearly considering whether she should be telling her friend. Should such details be kept between the man and woman involved? Jessica felt anger rising up in her at the rich woman's words and heard herself speaking before she gave herself time to think properly. Well, you can't understand because you have always been rich. She threw a hand up to her mouth as soon as she finished speaking, wishing she could take it back and hoping she had not just ruined her chance of visiting again later that evening. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that, she said quickly, feeling her face redden because she was embarrassed to have lost control. What did you mean, though? What does my background have to do with it? Rosie asked, seemingly genuinely interested, and not offended at all by her sharp words, so blinded by her wealth it seemed. What you maybe need to understand, Rosie, is that here in Nugget Falls, families are sometimes struggling to make enough money to put food on the table. So, every morsel counts and waste is simply not an option, she tried to explain. I am guessing this is not something you have ever experienced? She asked, still angry that someone could be so ignorant of the real world. Oh, Rosie said simply, as she dropped her head, her eyes focused on the kitchen floor as though ashamed of her assumptions, or perhaps just thinking it through. That is certainly why Cal doesn't like waste, and I know that's why my mother doesn't, as we have had times when there has only been food enough for me and my brothers. Not enough for Father even, and he has had to go to work in the mine on an empty stomach. That's why he sometimes found alternative ways to make money, Jessica added, although she didn't think Rosie would know about her father, and she wasn't about to share this with her. The gossip mongers in the town would undoubtedly tell her all about him, but Jessica had built a wedge between Rosie and the townsfolk, and so she doubted anyone had confided in her in the time that she had been there. I understand, Rosie said quietly. I guess I have taken a lot for granted in New York City. Thank you for telling me. It means I can be more considerate with Cal in the future. Jessica inwardly sighed at having inadvertently helped Rosie to understand Cal better and potentially get them even closer together. Then she remembered that would not be a concern in a few hours when she put her full plan into action. You are welcome, Rosie. It's not your fault you don't understand this lifestyle. I am happy to help. Now, I must get off home, or my mother will be knocking on your door. She smiled at Rosie as she stood and let herself out, reminding her she would see her soon, over the 4 long days. Cal was more than ready to get off his horse after such a long time in the saddle. He had not stopped much over the 4 long days, even riding through the night as it was too cold to stop for any length of time. In the hotter months, he would have tied his horse to a tree and slept under it, but it was far too cold for that at this time of the year. His eyes were heavy, but he was eager to get to his destination and didn't have far to go now. As he rode, he thought about Rosie and hoped she was all right and was better settled and more independent and used to life around the home. Not so that she could look after him, but because he knew she was desperate. Since he had set off, he had thought almost solely about Rosie, and the more he thought about her, the more he realized he had fallen for her and could not wait for her to become his wife. Finally, he rode into the settlement and found a place to tether his horse for the time being. It was too dark to really see much, so he felt his way up the path toward a door. He could hear chatter within, so he slowly eased the door open. He smiled into the well-lit room before his eyes could adjust and he could clearly see what was before him. "Jessica!" he shouted out, just as he saw her pushing a candle over onto the branches of a huge tree in his kitchen. He looked around frantically to see Rosie looking puzzled, her eyes darting from the flames rising on the tree to Cal standing in the doorway. Cal looked back at Jessica, who was startled when Cal called her name and fell into the tree. Cal froze, not quite knowing what to do first. He watched silently as Rosie ran to the tree and pulled at her friend, dragging her away from the tree and to the safety of the outdoors. Cal jumped into action as he watched the tree go up in flames in his own kitchen. This is not what he had expected when he decided to ride all the way back home instead of going to the mines in Hale. While in the saddle, he had realized that he did in fact love Rosie and that he should be spending this time with her, not chasing fortunes. So he turned back and headed promptly back to his wife-to-be. He could not have anticipated what he was faced with now. He quickly grabbed the pail of water that he kept in the corner of the kitchen, and he doused the tree. The flames lessened, but still threatened to overwhelm the small room. He felt someone grab the pail from him, replacing it with another full one. He threw that water on the tree, again and again, until the flames had dissipated. The only real damage was to the tree, rather than his home. With the situation beginning to calm, he placed the pail on the floor and raised his eyes to the sheriff who had arrived to help. He shook the man's hand to say thank you, which certainly didn't seem adequate. The two men walked outside to Rosie and Jessica, who were among the concerned neighbors who had come out to offer their help. Cal looked from Jessica to Rosie, wondering where to begin. Jessica began to cry, telling them as she sobbed that she had started the fire deliberately because she wanted to be rid of Rosie and have Cal all to herself. She went on to say how she could no longer keep up the lie after Rosie had saved her life. Rosie looked upset by this revelation. Cal knew that she had trusted Jessica and thought of her as her only friend, and that she must now feel betrayed. Chapter 18. The townsfolk had certainly had a dramatic and complete change of heart over Rosie's presence in the close-knit community, having heard the full account of what had transpired during that terrifying night and how she had courageously saved Jessica, the very same woman who had spent weeks methodically trying to turn all the townspeople against her, spreading malicious rumors and deliberately trying to destroy her life and reputation. Earlier the previous morning, on a cold and somber Christmas Eve, Jessica had sent word through her tight-lipped mother that she had gone away and would not be returning for quite some time, perhaps never. She had finally realized the full weight of what she had done, the damage she had caused, and could not bear to face the locals who now knew the truth of her deception, so she had hastily departed to stay with a distant relative in Boston. Cal was glad, even relieved, that she had gone, that her bitter presence had been removed from their lives. But Rosie still somehow managed to be compassionate and forgiving, expressing genuine hope that Jessica would find peace wherever she went, a grace that only confirmed to everyone around them that she was indeed as kind-hearted and good a person as Cal had earnestly told them she was from the very beginning. On that chaotic night of the fire, with smoke still hanging heavy in the winter air, the sheriff had quietly pulled Cal aside and told him that the pastor was not quite well, his health failing, and had returned to his family in Nugget Falls. "Maybe this is the woman you need to keep a hold of," the weathered sheriff had quite rightly said, his knowing eyes twinkling in the firelight, and Cal had not had to think twice about the truth of those words. Now he stood in the bustling center of town, the snow-dusted square decorated with festive garlands and ribbons, all of the townsfolk he had known all of his life surrounding him in a joyful semicircle, familiar faces beaming with genuine happiness, as Rosie, radiant in a simple but elegant dress, became his wife on the most perfect, crystalline day of the year.